There comes a moment in every nation's life when silence itself becomes a form of betrayal. A moment when looking away is no longer an act of peace, but an act of surrender. We are living in such a moment. You can feel it in the tension of our conversations, in the exhaustion of our people, in the way truth now competes with noise for the smallest space in our hearts. For years, deception has worn the mask of strength. Lies have marched as if they were patriotism. But truth, real, enduring truth, cannot be silenced forever. I've seen this country rise in the face of fear before. I've seen the faces of young organizers walking through neighborhoods where doors were slammed on them, but they kept walking anyway. I've seen soldiers return home, broken in body, but not in spirit, because they believed in something larger than themselves. And I've seen mothers stand in courtrooms demanding justice for children taken too soon. That is the quiet power of truth. It may not shout, but it stands. It may stumble, but it never falls. Yet there are those who mistake volume for vision. Those who believe leadership means dominating the airwaves, not guiding the conscience of a people. It is performance without principle, applause without service. And for a while, that performance can convince even good people to doubt what they know in their bones. That dignity, compassion, and decency still matter. But history has never bowed to those who build their influence on deception. It bows to those who fight for the soul of the truth, no matter how lonely that fight becomes. There was a time when truth held power in this country. When a president's word was not just sound, but weight. When facts mattered, when lies carried shame, and when character was the measure of a man's worth. Somewhere along the line, we forgot. We let arrogance disguise itself as authenticity. We let anger parade as patriotism. And we watched as the idea of America, this great, imperfect, striving experiment, was twisted into a reflection of one man's ego. That, my friends, was the silence. That was the betrayal. Because truth, the kind of truth that sustains a republic, depends on us. Not on a single leader, not on a single election, but on our collective refusal to accept falsehood as normal. When a lie is repeated enough times, it doesn't become truth. It only becomes familiar. And when familiarity numbs our outrage, when we begin to shrug off corruption, we invite decay into the foundation of democracy itself. The test before us is not whether we can survive the storm. The test is whether we still recognize the difference between the storm and the sky. This moment right here is not about one man or one administration. It is about who we are when the lights are off, when the applause has faded, when nobody is watching but history itself. Do we stand by and let our institutions crumble under the weight of dishonesty? Or do we rebuild them with our own hands, knowing that truth demands work and sacrifice? It is not enough to condemn the lie. We must commit to the truth. It is not enough to expose corruption. We must replace it with courage. Remember, truth is not convenient, it is not fashionable, it is not comfortable, but it is the only thing that endures. It's what drove Martin Luther King to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, knowing he might not see the promised land. It's what carried Lincoln through a war that tore this nation apart, knowing unity would come at the price of pain. It's what guided our ancestors across oceans and deserts and frontiers. The unshakable belief that if they stood for what was right, history would stand with them. So let me speak plainly. Truth will not come back to this nation through politics alone. It will come back through us, through ordinary citizens choosing honesty over hysteria, service over self-interest, and empathy over ego. The truth may bend under pressure, but it never breaks. It waits for those brave enough to lift it up again. And that's our task, to lift it together until the light returns. Because this is not just a fight for truth. It is a fight for the moral center of America. The world is watching whether we still have the courage to be who we say we are. A people who honor the truth, defend the weak, and speak up even when our voices shake. The choice before us is simple. We either silence the truth or we let the truth silence the lies. And so tonight, I choose to speak, not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because this nation deserves to hear, once again, the sound of truth, strong, steady, and unafraid. The silence has lasted long enough. The moment has come to break it. Bye again. There's a kind of power that dazzles for a moment, loud, boastful, and unanchored, but it burns out just as fast as it appeared. It feeds on attention, not intention. It speaks in the language of dominance, not duty. And for a time, that kind of leadership can seem unstoppable. The crowds roar, the cameras flash, and the illusion of strength blinds us to the hollowness beneath it. But leadership without purpose, without moral direction, is nothing more than an echo chamber of ego. It does not guide, it consumes. Leadership is not measured by the size of a rally, or the sharpness of a slogan, or how fiercely you can divide a crowd. It's measured by what you build when no one is cheering. Real leadership demands quiet courage, the kind that listens before it speaks, that lifts others even when it costs you something. And that is where the truth of history draws its line. Because every empire built on vanity eventually collapses under its own applause. The louder the boast, the quicker the fall. We have seen this pattern before. In the shadows of Rome, when Caesar's pride outweighed the Republic's laws. In the gilded palaces of Europe, where kings confused their crowns for divinity. And now in the digital halls of our own time, where spectacle has replaced service, and truth is filtered through algorithms of outrage. When a leader believes he is the nation rather than its servant, he becomes the architect of his own undoing. The tragedy is not only his fall, it's the damage he leaves behind. What we witnessed in recent years was not just political theater. It was moral drift. A leader more interested in trending than transforming, in dividing rather than delivering, in turning citizens into spectators while democracy burned quietly in the background. That was not strength. That was fear dressed as fury. Because it takes no courage to mock the weak or to inflame the angry. True courage is using your power to heal, not to harm. The irony that real leadership has never been about dominance. It has always been about service. It's the farmer who wakes before dawn to feed a nation that will never know his name. It's the teacher who stays after class for the student who's struggling to believe in herself. It's the soldier who sacrifices his own comfort so that others may live free. That is leadership. Unseen, uncelebrated, but unshakable. And every time we confuse celebrity for service, we lose sight of what makes America strong. History is a patient witness. It records everything. The lies told in the name of power, the promises broken in the name of pride, the moments when leaders chose themselves over the people they swore to serve. And though it may take time, history always delivers its verdict. Because leadership that lacks purpose is like a house built on sand, loud in its construction, tragic in its collapse. No spin, no speech, no slogan can escape that reckoning. I want you to imagine something. Imagine a young person growing up in this age of noise, scrolling through a world where outrage is currency and arrogance is rewarded. What kind of leadership are we teaching them to admire? If power is the prize and truth the casualty, then we will raise a generation fluent in manipulation, but illiterate in meaning. We cannot afford that. We must teach by example that leadership is not about self-preservation. It's about self-sacrifice. So let us be clear. Leadership without purpose is not just a flaw in one man's character. It's a mirror reflecting the complacency of a nation. Every time we choose comfort over courage, entertainment over empathy, we give permission to the worst among us to define the rest of us, among us to define the rest of us. The measure of our democracy has never been found in the swagger of its leaders, but in the steadfastness of its people. We decide what leadership means by what we are willing to follow. And here's the truth. Power will always tempt those who seek validation over vision. It will whisper to them that applause is substance, that control is justice, that fear is loyalty. But those who mistake fear for respect will always find themselves alone when the lights go out. Because real leadership endures, not because people are afraid to defy it, but because they believe in it. That belief cannot be commanded. It must be earned. So when we look back on this era, the question will not be how high the walls were built or how many enemies were named. The question will be what we built together, what bridges we restored, what truths we reclaimed, what hope we reignited. That is the measure of purpose. And if this chapter of our history has shown us anything, it is that leadership without purpose can rise quickly, but it cannot stand long. The time has come to remember what leadership truly means. Not to dominate, but to guide. Not to divide, but to unite. Because a nation led by ego will eventually crumble under the weight of its own reflection. But a nation led by purpose, by truth, by justice, by compassion, will endure long after the noise has faded. And that is where we go next, into the heart of that unfinished dream, where a divided people must decide whether they still believe in one another. We stand today at a crossroads where the dream of America feels both closer than ever and farther than we imagine. Closer, because the words of freedom and equality still echo in the hearts of millions who refuse to give up on them. Farther, because division has crept into our daily lives, into our families, our faiths, our neighborhoods, and our politics, until the very idea of us seems to be slipping away. This division is not new, but it has been fed and fueled by those who find profit in our pain, power in our fear, and victory in our anger. And if we are honest, we have all played a part in letting that fire grow. The dream that built this nation was not a slogan or a speech. It was a promise that in this land, every man and woman, no matter who they were or where they came from, would have a fair chance to build a better life. That promise lifted millions from poverty, guided soldiers through foreign wars, and inspired generations of immigrants to cross oceans with nothing but faith. But that promise has always been incomplete, always fragile. It demands constant repair, constant renewal. Because the moment we stop protecting it, it begins to fade. We have seen how quickly division can consume us. We've seen friends turn on each other over political lines. We've seen families stop talking because of the noise of pundits and platforms. And we've seen people confuse cruelty for honesty, vengeance for justice, and prejudice for pride. That didn't happen by accident. It was engineered. It was built on the oldest strategy in the book. If you can't inspire a people, divide them. If you can't lead them toward purpose, distract them with fear. And in that fog of division, truth becomes the first casualty and unity the next. There are those who have made a career out of exploiting that fear. They have told us that our neighbor is our enemy, that our government is our jailer, that our democracy is a scam. They have told us that greatness can only come from isolation, that to lift one group we must push another down. But that is not the American dream. That is its betrayal. Because the promise of this country has never been us versus them. It has always been we the people. It was written that way for a reason. Because our strength has never come from uniformity, but from unity. And yet, too often, we forget that unity is not the absence of disagreement. It's the presence of purpose. It's the shared belief that no matter how fiercely we argue, we still belong to the same nation, still answer to the same Constitution, still strive toward the same ideal. The dream remains unfinished because we keep mistaking opposition for enmity. But democracy was never meant to make us comfortable. It was meant to make us better. The hard truth is that the same freedom that allows us to speak our minds also demands that we listen with humility. In times of division, the easiest thing to do is to point fingers, to blame someone else for what's gone wrong. But the harder truth is that division survives only when we feed it. It thrives when we stop engaging, when we surrender to cynicism, when we give up on the possibility of redemption. There is no Savior coming to heal this nation for us. Healing will come when we choose, each of us, to see the humanity in one another again. When we choose decency over dominance, truth over tribalism, and empathy over ego. I've seen glimpses of that America in church basements where volunteers hand out meals to strangers they'll never meet again. In small towns rebuilding after floods and fire. In classrooms where children of every color learn side by side. Unaware of the walls the world will try to build between them. That is the America that still lives, quietly but defiantly, beneath the noise. It reminds us that for every voice that seeks to divide, there are countless others working to unite. The dream is unfinished. Yes, but unfinished means it can still be built. We cannot let anger define our era. We cannot let resentment write our story. Because division is not destiny. It is a decision. And the longer we stay divided, the more we lose sight of who we are. The greatness of America has never been that we are perfect. It's that we are willing to keep striving toward that more perfect union. Our democracy was not designed for ease. It was designed for endurance. And endurance is what this moment demands of us. So tonight, as we look around at a nation fraying at its edges, let us remember what binds us still. Not fear, but faith. Faith of this country, born in struggle and sustained by hope, is bigger than the noise that seeks to drown it. Faith that the dream is not dead. It's simply waiting for us to finish it. And faith that our divisions, no matter how deep, can be healed by truth, courage, and the relentless belief that we belong to one another. The dream of America is not over, but it is unfinished. And the next chapter will depend on whether we have the courage to tell the truth about how we got here. Because before we can rebuild what's broken, we must first confront what broke it. There is a cost to every lie we tell, and that cost is always paid by the truth. Sometimes it's paid quietly, through the erosion of trust that binds a people together. Sometimes it's paid loudly through violence born of deception and anger. But whether whispered or shouted, lies always demand a price. And over these past years, we have all been paying it. We've paid it in the loss of civility, in the collapse of shared reality, in the shattering of something sacred, our faith in one another. A lie can move faster than light now. It travels through screens, through headlines, through the endless scroll of outrage. It infects communities before the truth even knows it's under attack. And those who profit from those lies, they know exactly what they're doing. Because lies are not accidents. They are weapons. They are carefully crafted to divide, to distract, to drain us of the energy we need to build something better. The most dangerous lies are the ones that sound almost true, the ones that flatter our anger, feed our fears, and turn us against the very people who stand beside us. But here's the hardest truth of all. A lie cannot survive without our permission. It only works when we stop questioning, when we stop caring, when we start confusing comfort for truth. The cost of a lie is not just the deceit itself. It's what we lose when we accept it. Because when truth no longer matters, justice no longer stands. When deception becomes normal, democracy begins to crumble. And when the powerful learn that they can lie without consequence, the powerless are the first to suffer. We've seen what happens when falsehood becomes policy. When science is mocked, when facts are treated as opinions, when conspiracy is elevated above evidence. We watched families grieve while leaders called it fake. We watched citizens turn on each other, armed not with facts, but with fury. We watched as the line between truth and propaganda blurred until people didn't know what to believe anymore. And some stopped trying altogether. That is the deepest wound a lie can inflict. Not anger, but apathy. A nation that stops believing in truth stops believing in itself. There are those who will say that lies are just politics, that everyone bends the truth, that deception is just part of the game. But that kind of thinking is how nations lose their soul. Because truth is not a partisan weapon. It's the foundation upon which all freedom stands. When we abandon it, we abandon the very idea of America. The idea that facts matter more than feelings, that justice depends on honesty, and that leadership is a sacred trust, not a stage for manipulation. I remember visiting communities after crises, hurricanes, wildfires, shootings, moments when people had lost everything. And every time, I saw the same thing. Strangers helping strangers, neighbors comforting each other, people telling the truth about what they needed and what they feared. No cameras, no applause, just truth. That's what keeps a nation alive. And it reminds us that courage is not the absence of fear. It's the choice to speak anyway, even when your voice trembles. Courage is what Rosa Parks showed when she refused to give up her seat, even when the law told her to. Courage is what journalists show when they risk their lives to report from war zones, armed only with truth. Courage is what it takes for a citizen, any citizen, to stand up and say, "This is wrong," even when it's unpopular, even when it's dangerous, because the truth has always needed defenders. And democracy has always depended on them. So let's talk about courage, real courage. Not the kind that comes from belittling others online. Not the kind that feeds on outrage. But the quiet, steady courage it takes to tell the truth when lies are easier. To face friends, family, or followers who disagree, and still choose honesty over approval. That is the kind of courage that rebuilds nations. That is the courage that ends eras of deceit and begins seasons of renewal. Every lie we expose brings us closer to the light. Every truth we tell strengthens the armor of democracy. And while the truth may be attacked, it cannot be destroyed, because it's not just an idea. It's the heartbeat of freedom. It reminds us who we are and who we must never become. So yes, there is a cost to lies. But there is also a reward to courage. A reward measured not in applause, but in the quiet dignity of knowing you stood on the right side of history. The choice before us is simple. Continue paying the price of falsehood, or invest in the truth that sets us free. And as we move forward, we must remember, this fight is not just about exposing lies. It's about protecting something much larger, the very soul of our democracy. And that, my friends, is what brings us to the next battle, the fight for America's soul itself.